known Dr. Kearns for probably 16, 17 years. He was a close neighbor just across the highway from me. He's recently moved into town on the Marine Drive. We work together on some of the invasive plant issues that the city has been dealing with, and we have some different points of view, but we're trying to work those out. Dr. Kearns is a philosophy ethics professor at North Seattle Community College, and he's able to do it online for the most part. I think he does have to go up there once in a while for exams or whatever, but he's in Yachats teaching students in Seattle. I think that's pretty cool. So, this subject, if you are on any of the RSS lines, New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, Truth Out, you name it, this topic comes up on a daily basis. It's in the news everywhere, and it's not just New York that's dealing with it. We may have to deal with it here in this state, but it's all across the Midwest. So this is a very timely subject. Dr. Kearns had another topic he wanted to do a presentation on, and that was, do trees have rights? Which would be an interesting topic, and we may have to, have him back to do that. Since he lives here, this is part of the original idea of the Academy, and that was to take advantage of the expertise we have living right in our community. And I see several of our presenters that live in the community, at least part-time, and have presented for us. So please welcome Dr. Tom Kearns.
I'm going to try to get by without a microphone. Is that going to work? If it doesn't work, please let me know, because there's one here that if we had to, I would use it. So, what we're going to do tonight is going to come in three parts, and the most interesting part is going to start in about 20 or 30 minutes, and that's when you are going to break into groups of 4 or 5 people max and make decisions on 2 questions. I'll tell you in a minute what those 2 questions are. And then come back together after 15 minutes and report back to the whole group. So that's going to be one of the most interesting pieces of tonight. And the other really interesting piece, I think, for me, is going to be the list of questions that I'd like us to come up with at the end, because there's a lot known about fracking. We'll learn some of it tonight. But there's a lot that's not known also. And I would like us to collect a list of questions that we think need to be answered before you could make a good decision about fracking. So you might keep that question in mind during the evening until we get to the end, when we'll start to list. What scientific questions, hard sciences, social sciences, history, what kinds of questions do you think need to be answered before we can make good decisions about fracking? Okay, just a word about how I got interested in this stuff. About 2 years ago, I was delivering a paper at a conference on, and our session was on a human rights approach to environmental issues. It was a semi-new theme at the time. And after that, a professor at a college in Durango, Colorado, came up and asked if I knew what fracking was, and I didn't. And would my organization, Environmental Human Rights Advisory, be willing to write a human rights report about fracking? And I said, well, if I learn about fracking, maybe yes. So she and I and Earthworks, which had headquarters in D.C., worked together for the next couple of years, getting me educated about fracking and putting together this human rights report, which was then commissioned by Earthworks and addressed to Governor Cuomo and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, and to the members of the governor's Hydraulic Fracturing Advisory Committee. 10 or 12 people in there. So that's how I got interested in it. What I know about it, I've learned in the last 2 years. When we started 2 years ago, the literature on fracking was not that large. And it didn't really explode until maybe 8 or 10 months ago, and then it's just been this mammoth explosion. So if you put a Google tag, that every day there's anything about fracking, you put that on your news page, you'll get lots of stuff every day, pro and con. Okay, so here's the way we're going to proceed tonight. We're going to take the next 20 minutes or so for me. I'm guessing that some of you in here, maybe quite a few of you in here, know something about fracking. How many of you would say you know nothing or almost nothing about fracking? Okay. And how many of you would say you know some, maybe even a fair bit about fracking? Okay. Okay, good. Then this next 20 minutes is going to be just to make sure that we're all more or less on the same page as far as information about the process. And then I want to list 3 arguments that favor fracking and 3 arguments that want to ban fracking. And when you get together in your group, the 2 decisions you're going to have to make, I'll give you more information about these questions when we get there, but the 2 decisions you're going to have to make, so you can start thinking about them right now, is if your group was a member of the governor's hydraulic fracturing advisory committee and your group had 1 vote, how would your group vote and why? That's one question. And the other question you're going to have to think about is, and come up with an answer to, is an oil and gas landman comes to your door, you live on 7 acres, little modest house, your family lives on 7 acres, and offers you a bunch of money, and detail on that later, for a lease. Will you lease your land or not? Okay. This is basic.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we need to turn the lights down, or is it okay? Okay. Basically just saying that it's a big deal, and it's making a lot of conversation. So it's a big deal. It's in the news every day. It's been on 60 Minutes a couple of times, on NPR several times. They just had a 3-part series, I think, a week or so ago. Intelligence Squared. Are any of you fans of Intelligence Squared debate? They did a great debate, I think. So in New York, there will probably be 30 to 90,000 wells drilled in New York State within a year or so. When the governor's hydraulic fracturing advisory committee asked for public comment last fall, their previous record on a big policy issue about a year ago for getting public comment was 800 comments. That was their record. And then for this one, they got 74,000 public comments. And one of these news sources says, from upstate nuns to downstate doctors, from Jews against hydrofracking to the Gases for God coalition. Tens of thousands of New Yorkers have told the state what they think about hydrofracking. So if you're interested in this stuff, this is definitely. Okay, in 2005, the process of hydraulic fracturing for natural gas, was given exemptions from compliance with a whole slew of laws. So hydraulic fracturing does not have to comply with any of those laws. And they don't have to comply, they don't have to disclose the ingredients of the water, the slurry that they use for hydraulic fracturing. So the process, what is it? The full name for this process is high volume, horizontal, slick water, hydraulic fracturing for natural gas. So what is that? High volume, meaning it uses lots of water, and the reason it uses so much water, several million gallons of water for each frac job, because they drill 1 or 2 miles deep borehole vertically, and then turn the drill bit when they get to the shale bed, turn the drill bit and go horizontally for another mile or 2 or more. It's a lot of drilling. And for every vertical drill, you could have a horizontal frac track go that way, and another one that way, another one that way. So you can have multiple fracking operations from the same vertical shaft at one time, of course. So they would use 2 to 10 million gallons of fresh water, depending how deep and how far away. Got to be fresh water. All arrives by truck usually, and there's only 6,000 or 7,000 gallons in each semi, so that's a lot of truck traffic. They'll put in 600 or so chemicals, and those chemicals do a bunch of things. One is to make the water slicker. If you're familiar with hydraulic fluid, there's spilled any hydraulic fluid, the water is extremely slippery because you want to have as little friction as possible when you're doing hydraulic processes. The industry says we only add a small amount of chemicals. And what small amount means, if you talk about percentages, it's only 0.5, it's less than 1%. That's a small percent. But a small percent of, 10 million gallons adds up to, 50,000 gallons of concentrated chemicals that are, some of them are pesticides. You have to kill all the organisms that are down there. There's a surprising number of organisms down in the rock, a mile and more underground. That's been a surprise to biologists. And those, if they get into the pipe, they can, gum up the pipe a little bit. So you've got to send a lot of pesticides down there. You have to put a gel in there to hold, because another ingredient is sand. You need to put in about 1 million pounds of sand for every frac job. So you drill a shaft, and then you're going to fracture it. And maybe weeks later, you're going to do another horizontal shaft going that way and fracture it. You have to put about 1 million pounds of sand down there so that when the shale fractures, it cracks. You need something to hold the cracks open so that the gas can flow out, and that's what sand is for. But you want gel, some kind of jelly thing, so that it will hold the sand in place and won't all just pool in the bottom of the pipe or something. So those are what some of the chemicals do, although we're just guessing basically. This is so from one drill and you go down past the drinking water aquifers. Industry makes a big point of saying you're a long ways below the drinking water aquifers. So any claims that what we do down here, we explode this and crack this shale here, that it would affect the drinking water aquifers is just, you're a mile below that, so pretty bad. So, once you get the borehole drilled, the first thing you have to do is get some holes in the horizontal pipe. So you send an explosives gun down there that blows little holes in the horizontal pipe. Take that gun back out, and then you put the water, all that slurry in, and you apply 10,000 pounds per square inch, roughly, of pressure, and it goes out those holes and fractures the shale. And then out of the shale, there's, I'll tell you in a minute what's, right now, the shale, the Marcellus shale, which is the big one in on the eastern seaboard in New York, was formed. There used to be, 400 million years ago, there used to be an ocean there, and a mountain range to the west of that ocean. And over a period of, I don't know, it's a million years maybe, the mountain eroded. And so all the elements from that mountain erode down into that ocean. And of course, dust in the air falls down and then becomes silt in water. Dust in the air is silt in water. And settles to the ground, and the organisms that lived in that ocean, plankton and sea lilies and little shrimp, fall down to the bottom, their bodies fall down to the bottom and get compacted in that silt. And then as the ocean dries up, their bodies are turned into methane and are inside the shale. So what fracking does is go down, crack all that shale and let their little bodies, gas, come out and form. This is a map of shale beds. This happens in shale, so other kinds of rock doesn't have gas in it. So here's the Marcellus shale is here, and underneath it is another shale. So if they do exhaust the Marcellus shale at some point, there's another shale bed under it, further down the Utica shale. And you can see there are shale beds down here in Texas and Oklahoma, and it doesn't really show how much there is in Wyoming and Colorado and North Dakota, but you can see along the West Coast we don't have shale beds, at least none that have been discovered, so that part of it is not directly an issue for us. The only part of this slide that I'll say a little more about is the surprising discovery a few years ago by biologists that there are enormous communities of living organisms in rock. We normally think of rock as sort of a dead thing. You know, it's sort of the epitome of, it's the example we all use when we say a living thing or a rock. You know, it's just, rocks are just dead things, but they've discovered that little protozoa, and I mean, these are things that reproduce and communicate, have little filaments that communicate with each other, and that change the rock during their life cycle, create it and break it down. So they do element recycling. And how much of these, this is a class of organisms that you can refer to as deep life, a mile or more down. We wouldn't have guessed it was even there. Or sometimes referred to as archaea, because they're such old organisms. And how much of it is it, how much biota is there at that level? The answer is, by weight, there's more than there is biota on the surface of the earth, in air and land and water on the surface. That means there's a lot of living organisms down there. And one of the questions is whether and to what extent those organisms participate in element recycling somehow that would play a part maybe in climate change. Do those organisms that we didn't know anything about until a few years ago play any part in the health and well-being of our planet? So that's the question. As a major player, Sandra Steingraber. Anybody familiar with Sandra Steingraber? Write that name down. Sandra Steingraber.
Spell it again.
S-T-E-I-N, Stone, Graber, G-R-A-B-E-R. She says, as a major player in element cycling, deep life may be contributing to climate stability. And just, she refers to last summer, 2011, roundworms, little visible wiggly roundworms were pulled from a pool of scalding water 3 kilometers, you know, what is that, 2 miles, mile and a half, under the earth. So there's living things down there, we didn't know that. Okay, now we're going to do a quick review and then break into groups. A quick review of the arguments on the side of those who favor licensing fracking in New York and then 3 arguments on the side of those who want to ban fracking in New York. And I don't want to make these arguments, I just want to list them. You can make the arguments in your group if you want to. Pro-fracking arguments are those 3, energy independence and bridge fuel and, what was the third? Economic. We spend a lot of blood and treasure protecting our sources of energy, right, around the world. We go to wars to protect it because we use a lot of oil, and most of our oil comes from places that aren't here. But if we start using natural gas, methane, there is enough in the Marcellus Shale alone to last the U.S. for 80 or 100 years. So there's energy security, it's reliable, doesn't cost as much in blood and treasure, and it's a gift that's been given to us. We've discovered it, we've got a technology for developing it, we should. And kind of a bridge fuel, we can't yet produce with sustainable methods, wind and tide and geothermal, etc., all the energy we need, but hopefully we will at some point. Also, we need a bridge fuel to get us to there. I saw a story in yesterday's paper, 33% of our energy now comes from burning coal. And we need a bridge fuel that's cleaner than coal. When you burn methane, the amount of CO2 that's given off is half of what's given off when we burn coal. So that's better. And so that would also help slow climate change. And the third argument on the side of the pro folks is jobs. They have already, according to this industry spokesman, they plan to have 1.5 million new jobs in the U.S. by 2050, couple years. Just as one example, drive a water truck is $60,000 a year plus a $2,000 signing bonus. A story a couple days ago in Oklahoma where they're doing a lot of fracking. People are leaving their jobs to go get fracking jobs because they can make 2 or 3 times as much. Did you see that story? Yeah, they can get 2 or 3 times as much money doing that than they can flipping burgers. In fact, Dairy Queen, some town in Oklahoma is now offering signing bonuses for people who will come and flip burgers. So that's one economic benefit is jobs. Another economic benefit is if you lease your land and you get a regular income, royalties from the gas that's produced. That's income. That's benefit. And according to one industry spokesman, tens of billions of dollars of new wealth has been injected already into the U.S. economy by fracking, which means increased tax revenues to states and feds. And if you have a retirement account or an IRA and it's invested in oil and gas at all, which it almost certainly is, you're getting richer too. So those are the reasons to license fracking in New York. Arguments against it, and I'm going to disclose personally so you know how to take what I say, take into account my position on it, is that I'm personally on this side of things. And so it's hard for me to squish down the number of arguments to 3 that I did to human health concerns, environmental, and by environmental, air and land, and water is a separate. There's some big things about water. So human health. We basically don't know what the human health impacts are. So I hope that one of the questions that we list at the end, when I'm thinking of that list of questions as our work product from this session, that we'll get down and we'll have a list of questions that we think ought to be studied.
Your voice is fading.
Thank you. So, we don't yet have information about human health effects. We probably should before we jump in and start doing things that may impact human health. Of those 300 to 600 chemical concentrates that are poured into fracking fluid. Some of them are known, benzene for one is a known carcinogen. EPA, is very conservative about designating something as a known or probable carcinogen. They're careful about overstating. But several of them are also suspected carcinogens. About half of them are known endocrine disruptors, that is, they screw up your hormone endocrine system. And over half are neurotoxins. So some of that gets into the air. And in Wyoming, for example, rural Wyoming, where there aren't many people, but there's a lot of fracking, the smog in rural Wyoming is worse than it is in LA purely because of fracking. We know, just sort of a priori without, in general principles, we know that when people are exposed to more chemicals, you're going to see more adverse health effects in a population. You're going to see more cancer and more respiratory stuff, more neurological stuff and so on. So, in general, using just general principles, we know that if people are exposed to more stuff, there's going to be a higher public health burden, but we don't have studies to confirm that yet.
Can I just ask you, sorry, before you go? It says there 40% of the presumed ingredients are known or suspected. Does that mean presumed as for the general public, or even the regulators don't know what the ingredients are?
What regulators?
Well,
Yeah.
did they tell the EPA what the ingredients are, or don't they even know?
There's no requirement to disclose.
Okay, so it's
No
presumed for
requirement.
everyone.
We don't even tell doctors that are dealing with the health effects.
Well, in one state, Pennsylvania was it, they would allow, they could tell, if a physician called up and said, I've got the patient with this set of symptoms, do you guys use X chemical in there? They can disclose that on the condition that the physician doesn't disclose that to anyone, patient, anyone. So they're very tight. And now, there are some two states, I believe, I can't remember right now which ones they are, that have, as one of their requirements for permitting a new frac well, that company disclose the ingredients in their fracking fluid to, but I don't know any details about it, and that's only 2 states. Water. Now there's 3 big deals about water. Drinking water and wastewater, and it makes water disappear. Have you seen any of these flaming faucet things? They're pretty dramatic. If you do a search for flaming faucets, you'll get a whole bunch of videos and things like that. These are people who, this woman, this is her home, and she's lived there for a long time, and then shortly after the drilling began next door, her water started smelling funny, and she could light it on fire. She could open the faucet and light it. And someplace you can light the creek on fire. You can see the creek bubbling. There's now bubbles coming up out of the creek, and you can light those, but that's not it. And so the homeowners say, you have ruined our drinking water. And the industry people say, there's not one proven, I haven't heard this yet, but it's all over the place. They say there's not one proven instance of fracking being responsible for somebody's water contaminated. Homeowners disagree. And EPA found and documented an example in Wyoming of water that had been contaminated by fracking, and industry disagreed. So there's wells that people have drilled for drinking water. There's surface water, rivers and lakes. Could those be contaminated? Of course. Wastewater, that we're going to talk about in a minute, has to be disposed of. Where is it going to go? That's an unknown at this point. And of course, drinking water, aquifers, where you get your well from. A study that just came out of Stony Brook a few days ago finds disposal of flowback water, that's what we're going to talk about next, poses substantial potential risks to river and other water. wastewater, when you put a million, say, let's just make the numbers round, make 10 million gallons of fracking fluid down a well, about 5 or 6 or 7 of those million gallons are going to stay down there, and 5 or 6 or 7 are going to come back up. And what comes back up is called flowback. And so it's got exactly the same stuff in it that was pumped down there. Just as toxic, you wouldn't want to be around it. And so in the beginning, the oil and gas companies were running it through sewer systems, water treatment plants. But if you know anything about water treatment plants, they are designed to take out bugs, bacteria. They're not designed to take out radioactive materials and chemicals. So that didn't work, so that's not allowed anymore. So what they do with that water, they want to get rid of it completely. And the way you do that is you have big, deep, 2 or 3 mile deep disposal wells. Ohio has several. And so they truck the wastewater to those wells and inject it underground. One of the problems that can happen with that is, I didn't mention, I think I skipped a couple slides, that there's air pollution is a problem, and then there's the problem of earthquakes. In the beginning, you pump that very oily fluid down deep into the earth where there are tectonic plates, and you in effect lubricate those tectonic plates, and so it makes it easier for them to shift. And up until about a year or so ago, 10 years ago, oil and gas drillers were denying that fracking caused any earthquakes. And then they just couldn't escape doing a study themselves in England and found out that, well, yes, I guess fracking did cause some earthquakes. But the fracking process itself also can cause earthquakes, and the storage of those fluids can cause earthquakes. But they're not very many, and they're small. So there's really not anything to worry about. Less than 2 on the Richter scale.
How does the water get radioactive?
Thank you. Because there's flowback water, which is just the same stuff that you put down, it's going to flow back up. And there's what they call produced water. And that's a combination of flowback and all the stuff that's picked up from the shale. So that's residues from that mountain range, all the elements, and a fair amount of radioactive stuff, and extreme salinity. Someone estimated that if oil and gas, if fracking fluid were pumped, disposed into rivers, within 2 years, all the fresh water in the country would be saline. So it's extremely saline. So you don't want anything to do with it. And there isn't any technology available yet for cleaning it at all. Yes?
The flowback, how does the flowback get, that many 1,000 feet up? Gravity, it seems like gravity can cause the water to go down.
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we ought to write that on our list of questions. So, how much wastewater is there? In a year, if there are 30 to 90,000 wells drilled and fracked in New York, each year there would be several billion, would it be gallons of wastewater produced in New York alone and then stored. And Senator Stangraber tries to make that visible for us. Then the amount of fracking wastewater in New York State alone under this proposed buildup would exceed 62 billion gallons, which is the amount of water that flows over Niagara Falls in 35 hours. So if you stand and watch for 35 hours all that water going over Niagara Falls, that's about 60 billion gallons of water, and that's got to be stored somewhere in a place that we won't ever have access, that we'll never contact because it can't be cleaned. And the last thing, and I think one of the most important things, is it literally makes water disappear. So there's several billion gallons of water that are stored somewhere entombed, you could say, in the earth permanently. So they are taken, most water, we say sometimes that people waste water, you should turn the water faucet off, but we're not really wasting it. We're just recycling. It goes, up and then evaporates, and then rain, and then the ocean, and then it evaporates again, and it falls down. So that's the hydroelectric cycle. This water is all taken completely out of the hydroelectric cycle. So, we're a water planet. We call ourselves a water planet, but virtually all of our water, 99% of it is salt water, only 1% is fresh. And this requires fresh water. It's taking that amount of fresh water in an era when we're not going to be fighting wars over oil as much, but we are going to be in the coming decades fighting wars over water. So with climate change, even bigger deal. Okay. Senator Van Graver says, fracking is not a bridge to the future. It's a plank on which we walk, blindfolded at the point of a sword. There's no right way to do it, and the pirates are not our friends. She lives in Ithaca. Okay, now it's time to break into groups of 4 people, maybe 5 at the very most, so just right there, and hold your chairs away from other people. And 2 questions. Your group gets 1 vote on this 10 or 12 person advisory committee, so it's an effective vote. And when you report back in 15 minutes, I'd like to hear what your vote is and the reasons for it. The reasons are almost as important as the vote. And if your group, for some reason, can't come to a decision, the default vote is yes, you'll vote for fracking. No pressure. Now, the second question is your family lives on, has a modest home on 7 acres in New York, and a landman, that's what they call them, landman, come to your door and say, we would like to lease your land, put a small pad on your land and drill, and then frack vertically a few times. And for that, we will pay you $5,000 an acre as a signing bonus, and then 18% royalties on all the gas that's produced from under your land. So if your land is on 7 acres and we drill a horizontal thing that goes off into somebody else's land, you'll get from the gas that comes under your land. 18% is, depending on how much gas they get out there, if they get a few million units. So will you accept that lease? Will you sign that lease or not, and the reasons? Questions about the question, Katrina?
Well, I was going to add something. Another dimension they usually say when they come to you with this offer is like, oh, and by the way, if you don't want to do this, we'll go to your neighbor, and they'll just drill into your land anyway.
Thank you for that. The drilling tower has to be a certain distance away from your house. The distance that it has to be, if the tower is X feet tall, it has to be that far away so that it doesn't, if it falls, it doesn't hit your house. That's all it has to be. It's not very far. So it can be on the neighbor's property, and they can go down and drill, and you would then get nothing. Okay?
If the group decides no,
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out what the default would remain, because we've been getting natural gas for a very long time. Is the new part of fracking the horizontal drilling? Is that what's boosting the volume?
Excellent question, because one of the things you'll hear industry people say is, fracking, we've been doing it for decades. It's perfectly safe, never had problems with it. So what's the difference between this technology and that they have been doing? Number one, the main thing is that fracking earlier was all vertical. So you've got a shaft that goes down, measured in hundreds of feet, maybe a few thousand feet at the most. Drop an explosive down there, and it shatters and then makes that well a little more productive apparently. Now, the difference is drill bits that can be turn and go sideways, so you're exposed to a lot more rock down there, and now we're using hydraulics rather than explosives. So that means all that fluid and all those chemicals.
Is there anyone, any nonprofit or other agency giving environmental incentives to landowners to not?
Giving
Giving financial incentive for landowners to not permit fracking on their land? Is anyone
paying people to
encountering-
not
Yeah, is anyone
understand.
encountering these offers?
It's like the Nature Conservancy does.
like the Nature Conservancy?
They don't
Not
have
that
that
I'm
much.
aware of.
Yeah, finances may not be available.
The place, there's by the way, I put my email address on the last slide here in case anyone wants to communicate with me or ask questions in the future. But Sandra Steingraber was awarded about a year ago, the Teresa Hines Award for environmental writing, which comes with a $100,000 award. And she and her husband have 2 kids. They live very modestly in a house that's about 800 or 900 square feet in Ithaca, New York. And so $100,000 is a lot. I mean, that's a lot of money. And she thought long and hard about what to do with that money and thought she shouldn't just keep it for herself. So she decided it would be spent on opposing fracking in New York. And with it, she started an organization called New Yorkers Against Fracking. And the website is NY Against Fracking. So that's a good source of information for what's happening in the fracking world. Okay, let's say one more.
You mentioned Oregon as possibly being of some impact, or having some, this concept of fracking having some impact in Oregon. What is the impact?
Can we wait?
Oh, sure.
Until we come back. Okay. Okay. Groups of 4 or 5.
One more question. You mentioned that it has to be fresh water that's injected down there. Why is that?
You would think that there must be some reason, though, because there's a lot more salt water, and they make a lot less people angry if they use salt water. So I don't know. Maybe it's something to do with viscosity. I don't know. Okay, groups of 4 or 5. You got 15 minutes, so that's still big hands on it.
It all results in ruining our ecology, ruining our environment. We don't want, why should we support something that provides more energy that's not renewable? I mean, it makes no sense. We should, as a bridge fuel, all it does is slow down their development of more efficient, energy efficient, and slow down the development of wind, surf, wave energy.
How would you feel?
You see that in coal. I mean, coal, cut off whole mountains and polluted all these things.
Right.
Plus it's very polluting to burn it. So they did do that 100 years ago.
Yeah,
We are.
Exactly.
It's just the same thing.
Yeah, so if you don't learn from the past.
And also I question the urgency of doing this so rapidly because the price of natural gas now is like super low. We're exporting it.
Plus, there's so much gas up in Canada.
In fact, when I lived in Michigan, they used to burn this stuff.
We should resist the temptation and not bother with it.
And why do we have to accept the gift?
And it was independence from all these foreigners. We don't need the Arabs and the Russians and whatnot. We are going to be independent.
That sounds really tempting, doesn't it?
The problem with that is that, okay, we can do away with the coal-fired plants which produce their own pollution and all the rest of it.
Always. I mean, there are certain areas of the country where mineral rights have been exempted way back, by treaties from the 1850s on forward. So
Is that a question? I mean, that's just a concern in terms of, no, but I mean in terms of the reason, do we need it?
Do we need to use that
fuels and not leave any for our children and grandchildren and
Yeah, that's another interesting question. How many generations down the line are we responsible for? You ever think of that in terms of just how far down the line do we really need to be concerned?
That would bother me. It's just such a, they know how to clean them. Invasive species would take years to do. Yeah, that's true. Than we do about the chemicals.
Say no. I would say I would don't know, but because of further study, that would be our reasoning that it's, that there are some promises here that are not all. I mean, it isn't all negative. We had a whole list of good stuff. The independence, energy independence, bridge fuel, less destructive oil and coal.
Mine is not exempt from our clean air, water, etc. laws. I mean, it is exempt. We're losing water when there's parts of our country and other countries that are in need of water storage. And the issues are not studied.
Water itself.
Issues aren't studied either.
5,000, offers you $5,000 per acre in a signing bonus, and then 18% royalties. You accept or not? I want a person to show the potential consequences, negative consequences of all of this. And I think there has to be a law that realtors have to disclose what's going on for future home buyers and things like that.
As a political scientist, is that logical? I mean, am I talking? Does it offer an opportunity for the community to get together and actually ban and do something? Or is that pie in the sky? Do you think that could happen?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Aaron Brockovich.
Sold the highest bidder.
So I have 80 years of this just think we're going to keep taking water out of our ecosystem for 80 years. We're doomed. We're doomed. Yeah.
We're going to find out what your decisions were and what the decision was, what the reasons were. And I'm guessing that you might have decided that there were some things you still needed to know before you could make, that would be good to know before people can make decisions. So please make notes to yourself so that you can collect those. So let's start with that first question. A group who wants to report and say what their decision was and why. What was your decision?
Our decision was no.
No?
And we had three main reasons.
Let's have just one of them.
The exemption from the EPA laws and clean air and health and all that sort of stuff.
You didn't like that. Okay. Another group, what did you decide?
Was that a pro or that was a con vote?
That was a no-go.
Okay, another group.
We voted no, and our primary reason was concern about the amount of water being taken out of our ecosystem when we're already experiencing climate change. The likelihood of that accelerating scares us.
Good reading. Thank you. Another group. Yes.
Our group voted no.
Okay.
So,
many
reasons, I guess one of them was just unknown health effects.
Unknown health effects, okay. There's probably a bunch of other unknowns too that we would need to Your group.
Well, we voted no also, and one reason being the lack of research for, on the health and environmental effects.
Lack of research, we don't know enough about health and environmental impacts, okay? That's your group.
Naturally, no, but
Naturally, no.
even if they let us know all the poisonous stuff that's in there, they still have no way of cleaning it up.
Okay. Another group. David.
Yes, we voted no because of the genetic problem. Burning fossil fuels, whatever the fuels are, produces polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and those are mutagens, very strong mutagens. And the fracking is just putting off developing alternative fuel sources or energy sources.
Here. Sherry.
Yes, our group voted no for several reasons, some of which have already been stated. One is, our biggest one was the exemption from the regulations. That was just insane and a no-go. That couldn't even be considered unless that was changed.
Okay.
And then we also thought about, we also talked about how this seems to be so profit-driven, which takes away not only concern for safety, but also slows down production of other renewable energy sources. And then the third thing we talked about was the fact that this is proceeding so fast, and we could end up with such a large volume of natural gas that we have no way to distribute, because all the distribution channels and methods are owned by the oil companies.
Okay. Thank you for all of this. Yeah, those are all important. Another group.
My group voted no as well for a lot of the same reasons, and perhaps the one that's not mentioned yet, our grandchildren.
The grandchildren.
Very
Generation no. Another group.
So ours was no, and you've covered all of our points.
Another group? All the groups have been, okay, so we've got, okay.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me that this is a cancer on Mother Earth.
That's a nice, brief way to say it. Okay.
Well, it occurred to us as well that it's sort of crunch time for democracy. You know, we either get these corporations out of control of our government, or we go down in the ecological sense this way, very, very rapidly.
There are some places that have banned fracking already. France is one. Bulgaria is one that have completely banned it. Pittsburgh is another. Vermont is another.
How did they get the authority to ban this?
Well, they did it.
How did that come about? Who claimed authority to, stand up and make, require that decision? Citizens? Citizens?
Well, they did it in response to citizen concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the government was the...
Legislatures, yeah.
Was the initiating and holding the authority to...
Well, that's how it happened in Vermont. I'm not familiar enough with...
Just curious.
And, yeah.
Because, in other words, what are the models for...
We have a person who can speak to France here.
Yeah, as far as I know, the reason that France banned it, they didn't ban fracking itself, but they said they can only drill wells in places which are at least a certain distance from centers of people populations of a certain density. And they went all around and looked, and they couldn't find any place where there was gas. Therefore, de facto it's banned. It's a very French way.
It's a very French.
One of the questions that our group had was, if the feds have failed to regulate this industry, and it just kind of sailed through during the Energy Act of the Bush administration, and Halliburton had a lot to do with it because they had the chemicals. Thank you very much. We talked about, well, maybe the states could regulate, and then another party said, well, wouldn't that be akin to our marijuana laws in Oregon State, where yes, medical marijuana is legal here, but the feds can still come in and put you in jail. So the states can't really regulate then. They don't really have the power to do that if the feds don't want it to happen.
No, but this Energy Policy Act that exempted them from all that said the states will do the regulating, which is exactly what industry would like, because who's got power? I mean, the federal government doesn't hardly have enough power to regulate oil and gas. States would, I mean, they just don't have the oomph. Look at the amount of money that's being infused into this whole, so it's...
How did Vermont do it? Well, they're just weird up there.
Yeah, and another way they did it is by not having any shale. So they're going to be...
You were talking about Governor Cuomo and New York, and I can say this, that I read a lot of the New York Times, and it's a big item. It's always, it was always on their website. They're always talking about fracking one way or another.
Multiple stories. The New York Times did one of the best investigative pieces on this learning about a year ago, a series that went on and on. And of course, the beautiful thing about the New York Times is they not only refer to documentation for the reports and the testimony and all that, they provide it to you online with highlights through it and things. So it's a set of stories really powerful. One other little note is that you hear industry want to say that we're going to rely on science, on what science tells us. We're not going to rely on what those, considered crazies think. We're going to rely on science. That's another advantage to them, to rely on science, because science acts so slowly. Science takes forever, and so the more that can happen before science gets done, the better for industry.
That's where I get a little confused sometimes, because when you look at the FDA and how long it takes to get approval for a particular medicine, drug, etc., then how come it doesn't take that long to get approval to make sure something like this is safe?
Because there's no such thing as the FDA that takes
EPA.
to do with the fracking.
That's exactly the right question, because we need all this regulation, studies and regulation for a pill that you have a choice about whether you're going to take or not. But we have very little regulation about air that you have no choice about whether you're going to breathe it or not. So that's an important point. Okay.
I don't know whether this applies to this question or the next one, but I know I read somewhere about a group in Indiana of people who had been approached about leasing their land, and they all banded together and hired their own lawyer and came up with a list of their regulations before it was like just a total reverse. And then I never saw another article. I don't know what happened.
Well, let's do a quick review of the second question. We've got about 3 minutes to finish this. How many of you voted to not sign the lease? How many of your groups, your families, voted to not sign the lease? Did any groups decide to sign it? If you didn't, that means you probably didn't have any, you've got family members who just lost their job in the last 6 months, and their house is, they can't pay the mortgage, they're losing their home, and they come to you, and, you've got an opportunity to have, many thousands of dollars a month coming in, and you understand how they would be concerned about that.
I have an answer for that. Our answer to that was that we said, well, in our given situations, we would say no, but we feel very compassionate on people who would be in a position to need to say yes.
And in Sandra Steingraber's county, she lives in Ithaca, she says 40% of the landowners in her county have already signed it.
Where was that?
In New York, in Ithaca. Yes, I know it.
I was just watching a video from the library on the game theory. And really what it is strategy. And it's very chess-like. And so just when you were describing the choices, it reminded me of game theory because it's kind of a setup where, you know, there's A and there's B and then there's two choices. And they already know what people are going to answer by the very way they set up the deal. So, yeah.
That's an important piece of it.
Yeah.
Okay, now, since we have to move on, has anybody thought of questions that you think we need answers to before we can make? Sounds like you've made the decision already. That you don't need any more information. But
one of our questions was, why were they exempted from all the environmental and health regulations that we have in place in other industries as well? We pushed for them to follow those because that would automatically shut them down.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So that's one question that we would like to have the answer. That's kind of a history question to go back and find out what happened there.
The question is, who could shut them down? Is it just Junk and Jane Q. Public, or does it take congressional laws to do that? If it takes congressional laws, then the dole has to stop so that they can, the legislatures can be free to vote the way their constituency tells them.
Yeah, by dole you mean campaign contributions.
Yeah.
And the other way, subsidies for oil and gas, which we spend a lot of money on. Any other quick question? About one more minute. Then we have a treat. I asked, we don't have a poet laureate in Yachats, but we should. A poet laureate, but we should. And if we did, I would vote for Jerome, and he's offered in a minute he brought a poem for us, a verse for us. Let's collect another couple of questions, and then we'll get the final treat and be done.
It's not so much a question as a point, I suppose, but one of the things we
I
talked
hear
about
you.
was the real economic cost of doing this, the real one. That it is not cheap if you have to deal with clean air pollution, all the environmental factors. It is not cheap gas.
That's a perfectly legitimate question. That's a social science and economics question. What does it cost?
In real terms.
In real terms, full cost accounting, public health impacts.
Even the little guy on his 7 acres.
Exactly.
It's cradle to cradle economics,
yeah.
And that's something we discussed quite strongly.
Yes, that's huge. That's one of the most important questions. Another question is, this is boom and bust stuff that we're talking about here, right? Fracking is boom and bust. So what are the costs of a boom economy coming into an area? There are costs. It's not all wonderful. There's a huge impact on infrastructure, on social services and public safety and just tons of things. And then what's the impact?
Educate more kids.
The schools have to, yes, exactly.
There used to be federal impact dollars that would come in for, you know, like when they built the Columbia dams, or the Grand Coulee Dam, they had federal impact money there to develop the infrastructure, the roads, the streets, the sewers, the water systems, the schools and such.
This is private industry. They want.
What happens when the Exxon doesn't do that?
Yeah. And then the other question is, once the industry is more or less done and leaves the boom area, what's the impact? Do they just go back to the way it was before?
No.
Or do they, I mean, so that's part of the economic stuff. Another question. Two more.
I guess my question is, and I don't know if this is dumb or not, but is natural gas an infinite supply? I mean, if we go this fast at it, are we at risk of using
it up?
Using it up.
Okay.
Wasting it.
That's another important question. One of the questions that Sandra Steingraber asked, and she's a big leader in this stuff, if you haven't caught that yet, is, the way she phrased it is, does fracking kill more people than it employs? If it employs a certain number of people, and it causes public health impacts on others. So, those are some.
One more question.
One more.
Once they get the gas up, where does it go? Does it really stay in the U.S. or is it a world market?
That's a good question too. Did you have a question, Chris?
I did. I was reading about tar sands quite a while ago, and they talked about how there's almost as much fuel being burned producing it as being produced. Is there something similar going on here with all that trucking that happened?
Very much, very much. And you saw the story, did some of you see the story in yesterday's paper about how CO2 has come down? That story must have been, I swear, written by industry, because what they did not disclose in there is all the raw methane that goes into the atmosphere as a result of fracking. It's huge amounts. And so the lifespan of fracking, does it add more to global warming or detract from global warming? That's another question, I guess. We're going to be done now, except for the little cap, the final cap on all this, a treat Jerome has offered to read the composition.
Can you hear me without the mic? My voice is not what it used to be. Mr. Meyer? I hesitate the word poet being applied to me in any way. I am a writer of occasional verse. I am the alpha dog of doggerel on Green. I entitled this To Frack or Not to Frack. The natural gas industry frequently claims to have a special knack to hydraulically, horizontally, economically, and moreover, safely frack. This may be fiction, this may be fact, this may be that certain somebodies have been smoking crack. If you would at one sitting eat 900 or so Big Macs, your health, like our beautiful planet, would likewise be being attacked. Dick Cheney's Halliburton loophole, more or less 7 years back, which exempted chemical disclosures, certainly completely lacked any safeguards at all for keeping track of any discernible human health impact. And while our planet's life support system is once again being attacked, we're told by the experts repeatedly that we'd better clam up, better not talk back. It now is time to protect our water. It's the time for us to act. So let us begin by making quite sure we keep accurate, meticulous, careful track of the numerous ways we've been bamboozled, fooled and lied to, conned and jacked. We know the politicians bought by these polluters certainly have that deceptive knack. Then we should make a solemn pact to retire these political, paid-for, gassy toadies, to give them the pink slip, the hook, or the sack. I have no doubt we found the key. Perhaps you all might even agree. It makes a lot of sense to me. It is painfully and abundantly clear to see that the experts who are saying that it's safe to frack have more than likely been smoking crack.